Dr. Akeel Abbas. So in the last few weeks, there have been conflicting reports on Hamas relocating its political leadership from Qatar to Iraq. This development comes as ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel remain stalled, and Hamas officials reportedly warned that they could face expulsion from Qatar and other punitive measures, such as having their assets outside of Gaza frozen, if they didn't show more flexibility in the negotiations. If Hamas's political leaders were to move to Iraq, it would create further challenges to the ceasefire negotiations, as Qatar would potentially have less influence on the group as well. Overall, this potential move could be seen as an effort to avoid pressure from Qatar and the US to be more flexible in the negotiations with Israel for a deal in Gaza. However, in the last 2 weeks, both the Iraqi government and Hamas representatives have dismissed this claim. Nonetheless, it raises an interesting point for us to discuss: the impact a Hamas presence would have on Iraqi politics and the wider implications for regional powers, whether that's in relation to Iran, Turkey, or the US. So to begin, could you begin by describing the present landscape of Iraqi politics and how the major political groups have responded to the war between Israel and Hamas?
Yeah, thank you. I think the Hamas relocation in Iraq is going to happen. I don't think an official offer was made. And I don't think a Sudani government will do this. It will be in trouble with the US. The US will not be happy with this to begin with. So the second element in this, I think this was used by the armed groups in Iraq as a way to pressure the government, show sympathy, support for Hamas. It's more or less about propaganda than about something that has real essence, because the Iraqi groups have not really done a lot by way of supporting Hamas on the ground. Hezbollah did a lot more. And this takes us to the landscape in Iraq. So much of this was because the government insisted on them not participating. I think Sudani received lots of credit in Washington for his stand on this. He insisted, persisted, asked Iran, asked the other partners in the coordinating framework to check in the armed groups, to check in the militias, don't go too far. And I think there was also a US threat. So the assassination of the Qatar person, Abu Bakr Sa'idi, I think end of February or something, and the US raids, 80 locations the US said we hit, and we're going to hit other locations, and they left it open-ended. All of these combined forced some sort of stabilization in Iraq, and the behavior of the armed groups. Iran also came and asked them on behalf of Sudani, or probably because they were also worried about an escalation that cannot be contained for them. However, because the Fasal or the armed groups, some of them, they're not one coherent bloc. They have lots of differences among them. Some of them are more radical than others. Some would want to be seen as local Iraqi parties with an armed wing, rather than this pan-Iraqi movement, like as we say, as the case, for example, with Nujaba or with Kataib. They have this pan Iraq, this larger Islamist take on things. They're cross-border. They don't tie themselves to Iraq so much. While, for example, Asab Ahl al-Haq, the battalions for the righteous people, led by Qais al-Khazali, tend more to work within Iraqi politics, strike roots in the institutional arrangements in Iraq. They want to be seen as Iraqi. They're competing, for political power through the institutions. So they don't want to appear they're a militia. while the other ones don't care. That we are, a militia. I mean, in the way they say it, they don't use the word militia, of course, but we have a larger cause. The cause goes beyond Iraq. So that played, that caused some friction among them. So the arrangements that were arrived at, that the silence of guns, I called it. The Fasa'id, the armed groups, do not target the U.S. inside Iraq, do not undermine the military leadership of the prime minister, so on and so forth. They were not happy about the arrangements, and some of them had statements out criticizing the Asa'ib and implicitly criticizing the government. So they found another way, attacking the U.S. brands in Iraq, and that was testing the water, seeing how far they can go. And there was a backlash. I think the backlash was at the level of people, society, because some of the footage came out, and people are simply tired of this. They just want a normal, stable life. They can go to restaurants, and they don't want to deal with people barging in and hitting others and breaking things. And so I think that episode didn't play out well for them. And the government also came out hard against it and said that we made arrests, so on and so forth. That testing of the water, because it didn't work out well for them, I think the armed groups in Iraq have decided, or the old arrangement got reconfirmed, that we are not going to do much, really, by way of using arms, by way of practically threatening the U.S. In Iraq, or undermining the leadership of the prime minister, the military leadership. So, and I think it's in that context, the prime minister felt emboldened somewhat to remove the head of intelligence and the Hajj al-Sha'bi, what's his name? Abu Zainab al-Lami. Abu Zainab al-Lami belongs to Kataib Hizbullah, to the more radical group that challenged the prime minister, that challenged, even sometimes went against Iranian will to a certain extent, wanted to rearrange the Hajj al-Sha'bi. He was removed and promoted to a ceremonial position, which is the deputy head of staff or something, military staff within the Hashid. And that's a ceremonial position. He would be one of three, whereas he was the head of the intelligence section. That gives him power. He is leading an important directorate, let's say, within the Hashid. That one, this attempt by the prime minister, using different things in the background of the problem in Jajariya, that they were accused of, Abu Zainab al-Lami and his brother were accused of taking land from citizens illegally, forcing them out. These people went to Sistani. It became a public issue a few months ago, and the prime minister said, we will not allow this to happen, and so on and so forth. So there were a number of things. It was the prime minister felt probably he's strong enough that he could go on this move, removing Abu Zainab al-Lami, and an effective leader element within Kataib, and more on the radical side, those who could really undermine the prime minister when the Hajj is an official institution. But that didn't go well for the prime minister. Obviously, Kataib or Abu Zainab al-Lami pushed back, and they sent tanks and whatever surrounded buildings or the headquarters of the Hashid, and effective. I mean, we don't know so far what happened. There's no clarity, transparency, which is usual in Iraq, unfortunately. We're talking about public positions paid by the state. So we don't know if the removal was canceled, or it's still, I mean, he's still the head of the intelligence. Did the promotion kick in? My sense is that the order or the removal was canceled, but we need to wait for assurance. So basically the landscape, I mean, we are talking about a political fight, major disagreements within the Shia camp. The coordinating a framework, you have armed groups and you have political groups, and they're struggling to reconcile between two different things that are difficult to reconcile: asserting the state in control, and while at least the military side of them appearing to support Gaza militarily, which undermines the stability of the state. They're still struggling, but I think the side that wants to assert the sovereignty of the state is winning. It's not a sure win, like everything in Iraq. It's an open episode. We haven't seen the closure yet.
Regarding this, since Iraq has denied and Hamas also has denied any possibility to have the Hamas in Iraq, we can ask the question, if the situation has not been denied and it still be in the maybe rumors or potential truth, what would have been the reaction of the Shias and the Sunni and the Kurds in Iraq? Will the presence of Hamas divide them more, or will they all be much more, I don't know, will they accept Hamas in a sense?
Well, I mean, if it comes, I mean, to fruition, meaning there is a Hamas office in Iraq, it depends. Are we talking about the civilian leadership, the one in Qatar, the 3 or 4 or 5 people? Will they, if they will be in Iraq, could they influence the political landscape? I doubt they will be able to, simply because Gaza and Hamas is not a primary Iraqi concern. Okay, it's a side issue that the axis of resistance uses. The primary issue in Iraq is the struggle, for power among these different groups. So Hamas does not have really much leverage in Iraq. Iraqis have the usual sympathy that all Arabs have towards the Palestinians. So there will be that sort of welcoming, but I think the Iraqi government will be strict in terms of, don't get in Iraqi politics, talk about Palestine, talk about Israel, don't implicate us with the US. That is if this happens. And I highly doubt that this will happen. But if it comes, if this comes to be the truth at the end, the pro-Iran groups in Iraq will benefit the most from this, and they will try to use it to push the government towards positions that are closer to Iran, closer to fighting Israel in some sort of way, basically enhancing the radical agenda of these groups. I mean, Hamas would be in Iraq, not talking about development or economic development or employment or the things that interest Iraqis. It will not talk about anti-corruption. It will talk about Palestine, Israel, and how the Arabs have to support the Palestinians in the name of Islam and this in the name of Arabhood, so on and so forth. That sort of rhetoric benefits the radical groups, the Shia radical groups. It might have some Sunni support, but the Sunnis in Iraq right now are in a difficult position. They lack the leadership. They're weak even politically. The coordinating framework has basically monopolized power, essentially, effectively. Although there are Sunni partners, but with no decision-making powers. For the Kurds, it doesn't affect them either way. So I don't think it will change much in Iraq if Hamas is relocated in Baghdad, which I highly doubt.
But if there wasn't any approval and there was no denial on this matter, how would Iraq finance or provide a safe haven for Hamas?
If it happens, the Iraqi government will have to accept, the coordinating framework will have to accept, and so the Sudani government will not do this if it doesn't take the approval of Washington. That's simply and Washington might accept that Hamas is relocated to Baghdad as long as it doesn't try to affect Iraqi politics. So basically be a neutral power in Iraq. The same way it was in Qatar. I mean, Qatar just served as hosting a place, but they didn't, Hamas didn't get into Qatari issues or affairs or among the Gulf countries, and they know how to do this. Hamas knows how to do this. So if there is green light from Washington, and if there is assurances that with Hamas, not with the Iraqi armed groups, because the Iraqi armed groups will try to use the presence of Hamas to enhance their position in a variety of ways. But if there is some sort of tacit agreement through Qatar between the US and Hamas, okay, you can go to Baghdad, stay out of Iraqi politics, don't be an Iranian tool in Iraq, so on and so forth, focus on Gaza, Palestine. That's fine with us. Then probably Washington would green light this to Sudani. Other than this, it's really difficult for me to imagine that the Sudani government will allow this to happen, earning the anger of the US. I mean, the US used the threat against Hamas to leave. It asked Qatar to apply the pressure, and Qatar applied the pressure. And certainly, the US understands that Hamas needs to be somewhere else. And of course, they will have to accept that somewhere else. But is that somewhere else Baghdad, Iraq, and playing into Iraqi politics and affecting the balance of power to benefit the axis of resistance, to benefit Iran? No, I think that would just not, they could send them to another country. They could go to Tunisia, just like the PLO was in Tunisia. So there are lots of options, but I highly doubt that Iraq, on its own volition, will bring Hamas officially. There will be lots of anger from the US. This has to be based on an agreement or a tacit understanding.
In a similar vein, do you think that it would affect the Washington-Tehran relationship in terms of its the balance that Iraq has to maintain between the two? Do you think it would have an impact on that?
Tehran, Washington, I doubt that this will affect it. It will affect Baghdad, Washington. The location of the Hamas leadership is not, an important political issue for the U.S. Really, the main issue now is the military leadership, because those who run the show in Gaza are probably the two people, two military leaders, Yahya Sinwar and his deputy. And if the sense, I think the general sense is that we're going towards some closure of the fight in Gaza and arrangements of the next day. Now, the next day, Hamas would have to exist in some sort of way within the PLO, not as a governing entity. And there is a political track. I am almost sure that political track will continue, will contain something about the return of the civilian leadership of Hamas to Gaza. So this is almost certain. Just like when Arafat came, 94, 93, they came, for Oslo, left Tunisia and came to Palestinian territory in the context of the agreement with Israel, to establish a Palestinian state. So I don't think the issue itself is that important. It will fold into the larger resolution of the conflict after the Gaza fight is over, if there is a solution or arrangements. And my understanding is that there is an arrangement, a set of arrangements that are being worked on now between the United States, Qatar, Masr, Egypt, the Arab world, and Europe about reconstruction, peace building, political track, statehood, so on and so forth, and fast track. So that will mean basically Hamas will be in Gaza. The civilian leadership, we don't know about the military leadership. That's a different question.
So in the following ideas, could possibly Iraq become a proxy battleground in the Gaza conflicts? And what will be Israel or the US stance toward Iraq if we continue in this possibility ideas?
I think Iraq passed the worst time. The worst time was January, February. Israel was conducting airstrikes, lots of Palestinians dying. The headlines were from Gaza, and usually Gazans dying, killed, destruction because of Israeli airstrikes. That was very difficult to stomach, even in the West and in the Arab world and the Muslim world. So there was like this desire to do something, intervene, respond, so on and so forth. And the armed groups did what they could, and then got reined in later. I think now we have a low-level intensity fight in Gaza. Doesn't make even the news. Israel stopped doing these major airstrikes, because American pressure, European pressure, a number of factors. But basically, Gaza, I think, will no longer affect the balance of power in Iraq if there is no major escalation on that side. It's the potential threat is if Israel wages a major strike or a campaign, really, a campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. That would be a threat, because it would be difficult for the armed groups, Iraqi armed groups, not to participate and not target American interests. And they made their threats public, including Faisal Khazali, so on and so forth. So I don't think Gaza is now the major threat. It's southern Lebanon. It's Hezbollah, a fight between Israel and Hezbollah. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out, or not play out, because there's lots of negotiations, through third parties to find a political resolution to this.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time once again. It's great to have you back, and we hope to see more of you in the future as well. So thank you on CFRI.
Thank you so much for your.
Sure,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.